I seen it in her eyes.
You saw it in her eyes.
You ever notice how some rappers don't just fall in love? They become completely consumed by the woman? Because the stories you're about to hear are not normal celebrity crush stories. These are stories about obsession, addiction, humiliation, and rappers completely crashing out over women they could never fully have. We're talking about Drake spending almost 2 decades emotionally chasing Rihanna while the entire world watched her move on without him. Eminem turning a tiny crush on Christina Aguilera into years of public disrespect and rage. And Kanye West waiting years for Kim Kardashian like she was the final prize he needed to win in life. But trust me, it gets way darker. Because one rapper became so obsessed he was writing emotional prison letters at 4:30 in the morning begging a woman not to leave him. Another rapper watched his ex build a happy family with another man, then kept dissing her husband almost 10 years later. And one rapper publicly admitted he wanted a baby with a woman he barely even knew, on a song heard by millions of people. This isn't romance anymore. This is emotional chaos. And the craziest part, most of these women actually wanted them at first. Rihanna gave Drake chances. Kim Kardashian really married Kanye West. Nicki Minaj actually dated Meek Mill after years of him publicly thirsting over her. But once these relationships fell apart, everything got ugly. Suddenly it became diss tracks, sneak disses, public meltdowns, emotional interviews, cryptic lyrics, and rappers exposing their feelings in front of the entire internet because they simply could not let go. At one point, fans genuinely started wondering if Drake was ever going to emotionally move on from Rihanna. People accused Kanye West of turning Kim Kardashian into an obsession instead of a relationship. And what Eminem said about Christina Aguilera after she rejected him still shocks people today. But somehow, the last story on this list is the most disturbing one of all. Because one rapper crossed the line between love and obsession so badly, even fans started saying, "Bro, this man is spiraling." It's crazy how fast admiration can turn into obsession in the rap industry. One compliment becomes a lyric. One crush becomes an album. One rejection becomes years of public resentment. And honestly, nobody proves that better than Eminem. Because what started as a harmless celebrity crush between him and Christina Aguilera somehow spiraled into one of the weirdest and longest-running grudges in hip-hop history. Back in 1999, Christina Aguilera was everywhere. She was young, famous, fresh off Genie in a Bottle, and basically the new pop princess of America. At the exact same time, Eminem was exploding into superstardom as the most controversial rapper alive. And believe it or not, they actually liked each other. Christina publicly admitted she thought Eminem was cute during interviews and MTV appearances. Eminem heard about it and reportedly thought she was attractive too. Fans loved the idea instantly. The bad boy rapper and the innocent pop star? The media ate it up. For a brief moment, it looked like one of those classic early 2000s celebrity flings waiting to happen. Then Christina made one mistake. During an MTV special, she mentioned hearing rumors that Eminem had secretly married Kim. She also questioned the violent lyrics in 97 Bonnie and Clyde, where Eminem rapped about murdering his child's mother. Now here's the thing. She wasn't attacking him. She wasn't dissing him. She was literally an 18-year-old girl saying the lyrics sounded disturbing. But Eminem took it personally. Very personally. And that's where everything changed. Because instead of brushing it off, Eminem launched one of the nastiest public lyrical attacks of his career. On The Real Slim Shady, he mocked Christina publicly, insulted her, and turned her into a punchline in front of the entire world. Then it kept escalating. He referenced her in more songs, more interviews, more jokes, more music videos. At one point, he even used a blow-up doll version of Christina in a video while millions watched on MTV Daily. Think about how insane that is. A tiny celebrity crush turned into years of rage because she criticized one lyric. And the craziest part, he never fully let it go. Even years later, Eminem still randomly referenced Christina in freestyles and songs long after the original drama was dead. Meanwhile, Christina eventually got tired of the entire thing and publicly called his behavior thirsty. That's the word she used. Thirsty. And honestly, she wasn't wrong. Because at a certain point, It stopped looking like rap beef and started looking emotional. That's the pattern you start noticing with a lot of rappers on this list. The feelings become too public, too intense, too personal, and nobody represents that emotional obsession more than Drake. Now Drake's situation with Rihanna is honestly one of the most famous unresolved love stories in modern music history. Because unlike Eminem and Christina, Drake actually got the girl. At least for a little while. Drake met Rihanna back in the mid-2000s when he was still relatively unknown. According to people close to them, Drake instantly became fascinated by her. And once they started hanging around each other publicly, fans immediately noticed the chemistry. The flirting felt real. The energy felt real. The tension felt real. By 2009, they were spotted together constantly after Rihanna's breakup with Chris Brown. Then Drake started doing what Drake always does when he catches feelings. He turned it into music. Suddenly Rihanna was everywhere in his lyrics. Every album had references. Every heartbreak song sounded connected to her somehow. Fans started treating Rihanna like the hidden main character of Drake's entire discography. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Because even when they weren't officially together, Drake never emotionally let the idea of Rihanna go. The most uncomfortable moment came during the 2016 MTV VMAs. Millions of people watched Drake stand on stage and publicly confess that he'd been in love with Rihanna since he was 22 years old. The internet exploded instantly. Some fans thought it was romantic. Others thought Rihanna looked uncomfortable the entire time. And honestly, the body language told a story. Because shortly afterward, Rihanna admitted publicly that they no longer even had a friendship anymore. That's brutal. Imagine spending years writing songs about someone, publicly confessing your love on live television, then hearing that person quietly distance themselves from you afterward. But somehow Drake still didn't move on completely. Even after Rihanna built a family with A$AP Rocky, fans still caught subtle shots and references in Drake's music years later. And that's when people started asking the uncomfortable question: did Drake actually love Rihanna? Or did he become obsessed with the idea of her? If there's one rapper who turned a celebrity crush into a full-blown life mission, it's probably Kanye West. Because Kanye didn't just fall for Kim Kardashian. He studied her, waited for her, built fantasies around her, and eventually convinced himself she was the woman he was destined to be with long before they even dated. And honestly, once you hear the timeline, it starts feeling less like a romance story and more like an obsession that slowly became reality. Back in the early 2000s, Kim Kardashian wasn't even the mega superstar we know today. She was mostly known as Paris Hilton's friend and stylist. Meanwhile, Kanye was already becoming one of the most respected producers and rappers in music. Then Kanye saw Kim for the first time in a photo standing beside Paris Hilton. And according to Kanye himself, that was it. Years later, he openly admitted he wanted to marry Kim from the very first moment he saw her face. Think about how insane that sounds. He didn't know her personally. They weren't dating. She wasn't even part of his life yet. But in his head, Kanye had already chosen her. Now here's where the story gets crazier. Instead of moving on, Kanye West basically waited through almost every relationship Kim had afterward. He watched her date athletes. He watched her marry Chris Humphries. He stayed around quietly in the background while becoming more emotionally attached over time. And the whole time, he was putting those feelings into music. Kanye later revealed that he even wrote emotional lyrics inspired by Kim while she was still married to another man. The woman was literally unavailable, and he was already turning her into poetry and fantasy inside his albums. That's not normal crushing anymore. That's emotional fixation. Then finally, in 2012, Kanye got his chance. Kim and Kanye officially became a couple, and honestly, it felt like Kanye had finally completed the mission he'd been emotionally chasing for nearly a decade. But instead of calming down once he got the girl, things became even more extreme. Because Kanye didn't just date Kim. He transformed their relationship into a global media empire. Everything became bigger. Bigger headlines, bigger fashion moments, bigger reality TV attention, bigger public displays of affection. The proposal alone looked like something out of a billionaire fantasy movie. A baseball stadium, orchestra, giant diamond ring, cameras everywhere. And for a while, it genuinely looked like Kanye had won. The dream girl became his wife. The obsession became real life. But here's the problem with building someone into a fantasy for years. Eventually reality shows up. And reality is never as perfect as obsession imagines it to be. Over time, the relationship started collapsing publicly in the most painful way possible. Emotional breakdowns, public rants, social media meltdowns. Millions of people watch Kanye spiral while trying to hold onto the image of the family he built around Kim. And once the divorce happened, that obsession energy became impossible to ignore anymore. Fans watch Kanye West repeatedly mention Kim online, post about her relationships, and publicly react to her moving on. At times it felt heartbreaking. At other times, it felt uncomfortable, because the line between love and possession started getting blurry. Then Kanye shocked people even more when he randomly started saying he wished he'd had children with Paris Hilton instead because of the Hilton family wealth. That comment genuinely stunned fans. After years of presenting Kim as the love of his life, suddenly he was rewriting the entire story publicly in frustration and bitterness. And honestly, that's what obsession often looks like once reality breaks the fantasy. But somehow, even Kanye's story isn't the most emotionally intense one on this list. Because nobody mixed love, pain, chaos, and obsession together quite like Tupac Shakur. Now most younger fans had no idea that Tupac secretly dated Madonna in the 1990s. Seriously, one of the biggest rappers alive was secretly involved with one of the biggest pop stars on earth. And according to people around them, the relationship was intense from the beginning. There's even stories from rapper E40 about Tupac pulling up with Madonna riding in the passenger seat like it was completely normal. But the real proof of how deep Tupac's feelings went came later, from prison. Because while locked up in 1995, Tupac Shakur sat down at around 4:30 in the morning and wrote Madonna a 3-page handwritten letter. And this wasn't some casual celebrity note. This was emotional, painful, almost desperate. In the letter, Tupac apologized for ending their relationship. He talked about race, fame, public pressure, his insecurities, the danger around him. He even begged Madonna to come visit him so they could talk face to face. Think about that image for a second. One of the most dangerous, respected rappers in history sitting alone inside a prison cell before sunrise, emotionally pouring his heart out to a woman he felt he was losing. That's not rap star ego anymore. That's a man drowning emotionally in feelings he couldn't control. Let's go deeper into what really happens when admiration in hip-hop stops being normal and starts becoming something else entirely. Something obsessive, emotional, and sometimes even self-destructive. Because once you start looking closely, the pattern is everywhere, especially with Drake and Rihanna. What makes this story so different from a normal celebrity crush is the timeline. It didn't last weeks. It didn't last months. It stretched across years. Almost a full era of music history. It started innocent enough. Drake met Rihanna early in his career, when he was still climbing and she was already global. The chemistry was obvious. Fans noticed it immediately. Interviews felt flirty. Public appearances felt charged. Collaborations felt personal, not just professional. Then came the bowling alley moment in New York, the one fans still talk about. Drake and Rihanna were spotted kissing after her breakup with Chris Brown, and suddenly the rumor mill turned into confirmation in the public's mind. That should have been the peak. A short celebrity romance. A moment in time. Then separation. But it didn't end there. Because Drake didn't treat it like a moment. He treated it like a story he couldn't finish writing. Over the next decade, Rihanna started appearing everywhere in his music. Not always directly named, but emotionally present. Fans began decoding lyrics like puzzle pieces, connecting albums like chapters in an unfinished relationship. And the more time passed, the more intense it became. By the time Drake stood on stage at the MTV VMAs in 2016 and publicly said he had been in love with Rihanna since he was 22, the internet already knew something deeper was happening. That moment didn't start the story, it confirmed it. He didn't just say it privately. He said it in front of millions of people. And Rihanna's reaction said everything without words. A polite smile, a step back, a distance that fans instantly noticed. Shortly after, Rihanna herself made it clear they weren't even close anymore. No drama, no argument, just emotional distance. And that's where things get interesting, because for most people, that would be closure. But for Drake, the story kept echoing. Even after Rihanna moved on with A$AP Rocky and started a family, fans still picked up subtle references in Drake's later music that felt connected to her. Islands, memories, emotional callbacks, lyrical patterns that seemed too specific to ignore. That's why this situation stands out. It's not about one moment. It's about emotional continuity across years of music, fame, and distance. Now compare that to Eminem and Christina Aguilera, and the energy changes completely. This one started as a light celebrity interaction, a mutual "you're cute" moment in the late 90s. Nothing serious, nothing official, just pop culture floating in the MTV era. But then came the interview. Christina Aguilera mentioned disturbing lyrics from Eminem's music and raised concerns about violence in his storytelling. She didn't insult him personally. She questioned the content. But Eminem reacted in a way that shocked people even back then. Instead of ignoring it, he responded through music, aggressively. He turned her into a punchline, a character in his lyrics, a visual in music videos, a recurring name in interviews and sketches. What started as a harmless crush suddenly became one of the most publicized lyrical feuds involving a pop star and rapper in that era. And what made it uncomfortable wasn't just what he said, it was how long it lasted. Years passed, but her name kept reappearing. That's why fans started questioning whether it was still beef or something more emotional underneath it. Because real beef usually ends. This one didn't fully disappear. Meanwhile, on a completely different emotional spectrum, Kanye West was building an entirely different kind of obsession. Not anger, but patience. His connection with Kim Kardashian didn't explode suddenly. It developed slowly, over years of observation. He saw her from a distance long before they dated. And unlike most celebrity crush stories, Kanye didn't rush it. He waited. He watched relationships come and go. He stayed present in her orbit. Then he finally said something later that shocked fans. He had wanted to be with her from the moment he saw her. Not after knowing her. Not after dating her. From the moment he saw her. And when they finally got together, it didn't feel like a new relationship. It felt like the conclusion of a long emotional build-up that had been running in the background for years. But even then, things escalated quickly into something much bigger than romance. Media empire, reality TV, fashion dominance, global attention. Which raises the question fans still debate today. Was it love, or was it an idea that became real? Because when you zoom out across all these stories, Drake, Eminem, Kanye, a pattern starts forming. These aren't just crushes. They are long emotional arcs, unfinished feelings, public storytelling, and sometimes inability to let go. And that brings us to the darker side of this list, where admiration stops being admiration and starts becoming something fans can no longer comfortably label as love anymore. At this point in the story, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Across different eras, different rappers, and completely different personalities, the same emotional cycle keeps repeating: admiration, access, intensity, then emotional fallout that sometimes lasts for years. And nowhere does that feel more chaotic than with Meek Mill and Nicki Minaj. Because this wasn't just a crush from a distance. This was public desire that turned into a real relationship, and then turned into one of the messiest breakups in modern hip-hop culture. Long before they ever dated, Meek was already publicly expressing admiration for Nicki. Not in subtle ways either. Interviews, tweets, freestyles. He made it very clear he saw her as the ultimate prize in his eyes. Fans noticed it early. He wasn't just respecting her talent. He was fixated on her presence, her status, her entire aura in rap culture. Then in 2014, everything changed. Meek Mill and Nicki Minaj officially started dating. And suddenly what was once admiration became reality. For fans, it looked like a rap power couple moment. For Meek, it looked like a dream he had been speaking into existence finally coming true. He talked openly about how everything he had been rapping about — success, status, relationships — felt like it was manifesting in real time. And Nicki wasn't just a partner, she was also part of his professional world, appearing on music, tours, and public moments. At one point, Meek even referred to Nicki as his future wife. The relationship moved fast, very public, very intense. But intensity doesn't always mean stability. Behind the scenes, pressure started building. Fame, expectations, industry politics, and constant media attention created friction. And as quickly as it started, things began to fall apart. By 2017, Nicki publicly confirmed the breakup. And that's when everything changed from romance to fallout. Because unlike private relationships that fade quietly, this one exploded in front of millions. Social media became the battlefield. Lyrics became responses. Instagram captions became statements. And every small move was analyzed like evidence in a trial. Meek Mill and Nicki Minaj went from couple goals to public conflict almost overnight. Fans started picking sides. Clips resurfaced. Old interviews were reinterpreted. And the internet basically turned their relationship history into a running documentary of blame and reaction. But what made it worse was that the emotional energy didn't stop when the relationship ended. It continued. Subtle shots, indirect lyrics, public tension that never fully cooled down. At one point years later, they were even seen in a public confrontation that reminded everyone how unresolved things still were. And that's the key difference in stories like this. Closure doesn't always happen just because a relationship ends. Sometimes the emotional residue stays visible for years. Now compare that energy to Future and Kira, and you see a completely different kind of spiral. This one started like a fairy tale. Engagement, a child, public appearances, music success on both sides. For a moment, it looked stable. But behind the scenes, things collapsed fast. The breakup was public, messy, and emotionally charged. Allegations, interviews, and media narratives all collided at once. Future processed that breakup the only way he knew how, through music. And that music shaped his entire emotional image going forward. Songs filled with heartbreak, emotional detachment, and toxic coping mechanisms became part of his identity in rap culture. But the situation escalated again when Kira moved on and married NFL star Russell Wilson. For most people, that would be closure. But for Future, it became a recurring topic in his music and public commentary for years afterward. Fans debated whether it was emotional expression or lingering resentment. Either way, it kept the connection alive publicly long after the relationship ended. And that's what makes these stories so complicated. Because the ending of a relationship doesn't always mean the emotional ending of it. Sometimes a narrative keeps going through music, interviews, and public perception. Now zoom out again, and you start seeing something bigger. With Drake, it's long-term emotional fixation. With Eminem, it's anger that never fully disappeared. With Kanye West, it's patience turning into reality and then public breakdown. With Meek Mill, it's love turning into public conflict. With Future, it's heartbreak turning into a permanent artistic identity. And all of it connects to the same idea. When emotions become public, they don't just end. They evolve into content. But the most extreme examples still haven't been mentioned yet. Because the final part of this story takes things into territory where fans stop calling it romance altogether and start calling it something much more uncomfortable. Now things start getting uncomfortable. Because at this stage, we're no longer just talking about celebrity crushes or breakups. We're talking about fixation that doesn't fade, even when life clearly moves on. And one of the clearest examples of that comes from Drake once again, and his long, emotionally complicated connection to Rihanna. Because unlike most short celebrity flings, this story refused to stay contained in a single era. It kept resurfacing again and again, like an unfinished chapter that neither side fully closed. At first, it looked like a normal industry connection. Two rising global stars crossing paths. A bit of chemistry. A bit of flirting. A few public moments that fans immediately amplified into something bigger. Then came the bowling alley moment in New York, where they were seen together after Rihanna's breakup with Chris Brown. That moment alone basically locked the story into pop culture history. But what followed wasn't closure. It was continuation. Because Drake didn't treat it like a finished moment. He treated it like a story still unfolding. Over time, Rihanna began appearing everywhere in his music, not always directly named, but emotionally present in lyrics, references, and recurring themes. Fans started noticing patterns, islands, memories, longing tones, indirect callbacks that felt too specific to be random. And the more time passed, the more intense the emotional subtext seemed to become. By the time Drake stood on stage at the MTV VMAs in 2016 and openly said he had been in love with Rihanna since he was 22, the internet realized something important. This wasn't just speculation anymore. It was acknowledgement. A public confession in front of millions of people. And Rihanna's reaction was the opposite of dramatic, which somehow made it even louder. No big emotional moment. No confirmation. Just distance. And shortly after, she made it clear the friendship itself wasn't really there anymore. That's where fans started splitting into two groups. One side saw it as romantic honesty. The other side saw it as emotional overexposure. Because saying something publicly doesn't always land the way it feels internally. And in this case, it created a strange imbalance. One person expressing emotion loudly, the other pulling away quietly. Then everything shifted again when Rihanna moved on with A$AP Rocky and built a family. That's usually the point where a story ends. But this one didn't fully stop. Fans continued picking up subtle references in Drake's later music. Not direct mentions, but emotional echoes that kept the conversation alive online. And that's what made it controversial. The feeling that even after time passed, something was still lingering. Now compare that energy with Kanye West and Kim Kardashian, and you see a completely different version of obsession. Because Kanye's story wasn't about waiting in silence. It was about building a mental image first, and then turning it into reality later. He has openly said he saw Kim years before they were together and immediately felt a strong connection. Not casual attraction, but certainty. The kind where the idea forms before the relationship even exists. And instead of moving on, he stayed close to her world, watching her relationships, staying present in the industry orbit, keeping that connection alive in his mind over time. That emotional buildup eventually turned into reality when they got together in 2012. And for a while, it looked like the story had reached its peak. Marriage, kids, global attention, fashion dominance, media power. But what fans started realizing later is that when a relationship is built on a long internal narrative, reality has to compete with imagination. And reality always wins eventually. The eventual breakdown of the relationship didn't just end a marriage. It reshaped how people interpreted the entire timeline before it. Now people rewatch old interviews, old lyrics, old moments, trying to understand where emotion ended and obsession began. Then there's Eminem again, whose situation with Christina Aguilera is almost the opposite of romantic buildup. It started light, mutual admiration, a harmless celebrity crush moment in the late 90s. But after criticism of his lyrics, things escalated into a long-running public lyrical war that stretched far beyond what anyone expected. And even years later, references kept appearing in music and interviews, long after the original moment had passed. That's what made it uncomfortable for fans. Not just what was said, but how long it stayed alive. Because most conflicts fade. This one echoed. Now when you stack all of these stories together, Drake, Kanye West, Eminem, a pattern starts forming that feels less like coincidence and more like culture. A culture where emotions don't stay private. They become lyrics. They become headlines. They become history. And once that happens, there's no real way to fully erase them. Which leads into the final part of this story, where things go from emotional to completely unfiltered. Now we reach the final layer of this entire story. And this is where things stop feeling like normal celebrity romance and start feeling like a pattern the entire industry quietly understands but rarely talks about out loud. Because when you line everything up, Drake, Eminem, Kanye West, Meek Mill, and even Future, it stops looking like random love stories and starts looking like emotional repetition on a massive public scale. Different personalities, different eras, same cycle. Admiration, access, emotional intensity, public fallout, lingering references, years of indirect storytelling. And the most interesting part, it almost never fully ends cleanly. Take Drake, for example. Even after everything with Rihanna, fans still debate whether the emotional connection ever truly disappeared or just evolved into something quieter. Not necessarily romance, but something unresolved that kept resurfacing in music, interviews, and fan interpretations. That's what makes his story so debated. It doesn't have a clear ending chapter. It has phases. Then you look at Eminem and Christina Aguilera, and the energy flips completely. This wasn't long romantic build-up. It was emotional escalation triggered by public criticism. But what makes it stand out is how long it lingered in culture afterward. Even when the direct conflict cooled down, references and callbacks kept it alive in memory. That's the key difference. Some stories end privately, but stay alive publicly through music. Now shift to Kanye West and Kim Kardashian, and you get something completely different again. This one wasn't fast, wasn't reactive, and wasn't random. It was slow, deliberate emotional build-up over years. Kanye didn't just meet Kim and fall in love. He observed her from a distance long before anything happened. He saw her life unfolding in real time. Relationships, fame growth, public transformation, and mentally anchored her into his long-term emotional vision. That's what makes this case unique. It wasn't just attraction. It was anticipation. And when they finally came together, it wasn't the beginning of a story. It felt like the ending of a long internal narrative that had already been written in his mind years earlier. But reality always complicates imagination, because once the fantasy becomes real life, marriage, kids, public pressure, media scrutiny, the emotional structure that built it starts getting tested. And when it eventually collapsed, people didn't just react to the breakup. They reinterpreted the entire timeline leading up to it. Then there's Meek Mill and Nicki Minaj, where the energy was different again, because this one turned from admiration into a full public relationship, and then into one of hip-hop's most visible emotional breakups. What started as public admiration turned into dating, collaboration, and a power couple image. But once it ended, everything shifted into public interpretation wars. Lyrics, interviews, social media posts all being decoded like evidence of hidden messages. And even after years passed, traces of that emotional energy never fully disappeared from public discourse. Finally, Future represents another version entirely, where heartbreak didn't just stay personal, it became a core part of artistic identity. His relationship with Kira started as a high-profile romance, turned into engagement and family life, and then collapsed publicly. But what made it different is how strongly it shaped his musical direction afterward. Instead of closure, it turned into recurring emotional expression through sound, lyrics, and public narrative, even years after both people had clearly moved on in separate directions. And that brings us to the bigger picture, because once you zoom out, the question stops being what happened in each relationship and becomes something deeper. Why does hip-hop culture turn emotional experiences into permanent public records? In most lives, relationships are private. They end. They fade. They become memories. But in rap culture, especially at superstar level, emotions don't disappear. They get recorded, released, replayed, analyzed, monetized. A breakup becomes a verse. A crush becomes a hook. A rejection becomes a diss track. A memory becomes a lyric that lives forever online. And once that happens, there is no real moving on in the traditional sense. Because the internet never forgets the version of you that was emotional at your most vulnerable moment. That's why Drake will always be linked to Rihanna in fan discussions. That's why Eminem will always be tied to early celebrity conflicts in pop culture memory. That's why Kanye West's relationship history will always be studied like a cultural timeline. Because once emotion becomes content, it becomes permanent. And that's the real shock of this entire story. Not that rappers fall in love. Not that they lose it emotionally sometimes. But that millions of people watch it happen in real time, and then keep it alive forever. So after all these stories, from Drake and Rihanna, to Eminem, Kanye West, and every rapper who turned admiration into something much bigger than expected, one question still remains. When does a celebrity crush stop being romance and start becoming obsession? because some people see these stories as love expressed through music. Others see them as emotional lines being crossed in public, where feelings never fully disappear and everything gets recorded forever. Now I want to know what you think. Do you believe these rappers were truly in love? Or were they more attached to the idea of these women than reality itself? Drop your opinion in the comments and tell me which story shocked you the most. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned. Because in the world of hip-hop, emotions don't stay private. They turn into history, lyrics, and viral moments that never die.